Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
But I think what I want to talk about now is, very simply, poverty and children. So there's a story in the news today, I don't know if you've seen it. It's about how deprivation in poor areas cuts years off the lives of newborns. I say this possibly too often these days, but I can't believe we're reading this headline in 2019. I think part of the reason why we are reading this headline with such a sense of shock in 2019, we touched on yesterday. If you were listening to yesterday's programme, we stumbled across one of those little nuggets that begins to make sense of all the things that we find so confusing. So we keep being told, of course, that we're the sixth largest economy in the world. I think during the Brexit campaign we were the fifth. But no matter, it shouldn't be, should it, in the sixth largest economy in the world, that the other big documentary on the television last night about children going hungry on an unimaginable scale happens. It just shouldn't happen. And it makes even less sense when you look at our place in that chart, the sixth largest economy in the world. But we're full of food banks. And homelessness seems to be increasing. And most people, I tell you, I don't know, does this work? We're the sixth largest economy in the world, but people on 80 grand a year don't think they're winning. Or remember that bloke on Question Time? I know it was only one bloke, but someone on over 80 grand a year can't believe he's in the top 5% of earners, wage earners in the country. It all seems linked to me, because what we found yesterday was that when it comes to GDP per capita, so you work out where we stand in the world table by GDP full stop, then we come sixth under one measure and ninth under another. But if you look at GDP per capita, in other words, how the wealth of a nation is divided among its citizens, we come 20th and, I think, 29th. And that's how it makes sense. You know that other story that you see occasionally? This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, because at first glance it looks like a really powerful point. You know, when it says that a huge percentage of income tax is paid by a tiny percentage of earners, and that's generally used as an argument against higher taxes for the highest earners. And that's quite persuasive, actually. And as someone lucky enough to be in the sort of upper categories, not the topmost categories by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly well into the 5%, I used to look at that and think, yeah, actually, you know, this is be still my humanitarian heart. This can't be fair. If the top, someone will dig out the stat for me, the top X% of earners pay 50% of income tax, and that's a very powerful argument at first glance against tax rises. But what it's really a powerful argument against is our current distribution of wealth. So, of course, there should be a better spread of the tax burden amongst the wage-earning population. But you don't achieve that by reducing the amount of tax the richest people pay. You reduce that by reducing the amount of money the richest people have to pay tax on and redistributing it among the other 99%. So the last figure we could find is the top 1% of earners in the UK are paying 28% of the tax burden. You go to the top 50% of earners and you're looking at about 90% of income tax receipts. Our thanks, as ever, to Full Fact for providing us with these details. But I used to look at that. The top 1% of earners are paying 28% of the tax burden. And I used to think, well, that's not right. And it's not right, but not for the reasons I used to think. See, even a fully paid-up member of the snowflake brigade like me can sometimes get manipulated by precisely the right-wing rhetoric that I spend my life railing against. It worked on me, that. I thought, well, that's not right. But then someone pointed out to me that that is not about the tax burden of the 1%. That's about the taxable income of the 1%. And for the record, I think I'm in the 1%. There's no earthly way that we should be earning so much more than the rest of the country that we end up paying 28% of the total tax burden. We should be paid less. Or possibly taxed more? I don't know, but that's why it happens. Every single time you see that line, and you'll usually see it on the front page of the Telegraph or in the Spectator or somewhere like that around the time of non-right-wing parties doing well in the polls, Every time you see that, the top 1% of earners in the UK are paying 28% of the tax burden. Remember that we're the 6th largest economy in the world, but we're not even in the top 20, or we're barely in the top 20 when it comes to how that money is distributed among the population. All right? This isn't Marxism. This is counting. That's the problem. And that leads us to this story here about, well, I'll say it again, deprivation in poor areas cuts years off the lives of newborns. I said I didn't know what question to ask you about Andrew Windsor's latest accusations, allegations, problems. This is the toughest topic I think we ever really discussed together, isn't it? The current climate in Britain, the current landscape, the current political arrangements are such that life expectancy projections have been significantly scaled back, with statisticians saying that babies born today are likely to die 2 years earlier than previously thought. Its calculations are based predominantly on patterns in death rates, and since 2011, lower levels of improvement have been recorded. In other words, mortality rates that record the ages at which people die have continued their long-term trend of rising, but at a slower rate and with downward trends in some areas and among certain groups. Do you know, even I'm going to resist the urge to make any political points here, because this really shouldn't be about what colour scarf you're wearing. This should be about how much you care about that child. Right there, that one there. Just that child. How much do you care about that child? That's all it's about. Don't care about your party political loyalties or which politicians you currently enjoy being lied to by. Do you care about that kid, that hungry kid over there? You know, Thomas Coram, who founded the Foundling Hospital, talked over 300 years ago about, or just under 300 years ago, about the duty we have to do what we ought to do to help others. And I had the privilege of hosting the carol concert for the charity Coram last night at St Andrew Holborn, a magnificent church over in the city, where Thomas Coram himself is buried. He opened the Foundling Hospital at a time when nobody did anything to help abandoned children, parentless, motherless children. Nobody really did anything. They'd had to take their chances on the streets. It's always a very powerful evening, but it's such a beautiful charity that does such amazing work. I urge you to find out a little bit more about them. Hey, I'll tell you what, if your kids have read Hetty Feather by Jacqueline Wilson, then they'll already know quite a lot about the Foundling Hospital, and you can take them to the museum next time you're in town, next time you're in London. You can take them to the museum down by Russell Square and have a look around. And do you know what you'll find in there? You'll find that Hogarth, William Hogarth, you know the fellow, Gin Lane, Rake's Progress, Harlot's Progress, is it? And Handel, who wrote The Messiah, were two of the biggest supporters of the former naval sea captain Thomas Coram's attempts to help abandoned children, to help orphans. So nothing changes in the world, does it? Two very, very famous people from the world of show business doing their absolute best to help someone trying to change the lives of the most vulnerable and exploited human beings in the country. And you know and I know, you could probably even think of the names of the columnists now who would be queuing up to lampoon them as virtue signalling celebrities. Quite incredible. I think Handel even wrote The Messiah for Thomas Coram. I know that Hogarth painted him, a portrait considered to be the finest portrait by an English artist, and you can see it hanging at the Foundling Museum. But they're just virtue signalling, according to the sensibilities of our modern right-wing media. Presumably there were plenty of people around at the time accusing them of virtue signalling. But I was there last night, and a bloke gave a speech, which I don't think I'll ever forget. And he talked about how he was accepted into the Foundling Hospital in the year 1936. I'll say that again. The year 1936. And what he said, that will stay with me forever, is that the kids at the workhouse round the corner, now officially workhouses were abolished in 1930, but they carried on under a variety of other names for a lot longer than you or I would probably believe. The kids at the workhouse round the corner were jealous of him getting into the Foundling Hospital because of the quality of the food and the comfort that he got. And that is fewer than 100 years ago. This story here, deprivation in poor areas cuts years off the lives of newborns, for me at least, assumed a new resonance this morning because of what I heard last night. And next up on the programme, we're just trying to work out why children born in poor areas have seen their life expectancy shrink since 2011. How can that be? Why would that be? What would explain that? And it is really a question that should send a shiver down all of our spines, but I think there's a human survival mechanism that means until it becomes absolutely unavoidable and undeniable, we don't think the bad stuff can happen to us. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit simplistic. But you would think, wouldn't you, that if I told you that life expectancy projections for children born in some of the poorest parts of this country have gone down since 2011 by 2 years in some cases, you'd think that would be enough for everyone in the country to agree, right, well, let's forget about this, that and the other, let's just get this bit sorted and then we can crack on with all the other stuff. But no. And hey, I'm not being holier than thou. I find it hard to keep stuff front and centre that really, really matters because, you know, life intervenes, we gets in the way. But something about this wonderful man I met last night, talking about the fact, it was the year. I thought, because I was hosting the event and I read the notes I'd been given and I thought there was a mistake. I said, we've got someone here tonight who was in the Founding Museum. I don't know why. I've been there. I've read about it. I've seen the pictures. I know the dates. But something about the urgency and the immediacy of that, possibly the fact he was there in the room, lovely bloke, just really shook me. And when he said the kids at the workhouse round the corner were jealous of the kids in the Foundling Museum, which he entered in 1936, it's 3 years before my dad was born, it was an astonishing moment for me. I apologise if you think I'm being stupid and I should have known all of this in advance, but I sort of apologise with a cheeky smile on my face. I don't think you can hold me to account too stringently. So, since 2011, patterns in death rates show that although I think life expectancy continues to rise, generally there are downward trends in some areas and among certain groups. Now, there are debates over why mortality and longevity rates do what they do, but many experts point to widening economic equality and cuts in public services, particularly to adult social care and the National Health Service. Last month, the Health Foundation, which is a think tank based on research by academics at the London School of Economics, showed that those living in more affluent areas were continuing to live longer, but in deprived areas, life expectancy was stalling or even going backwards. Now, the very, very, very first time we talked about the socio-economic relationship with life expectancy, I think I came the closest to sounding completely out of touch with reality that I've ever sounded on my radio programme. Because I expressed spluttering incredulity at statistics. I think about the Jubilee line here in London, which heads east. And before the gentrification of Docklands and Canary Wharf and what have you, it was recorded that there was a measurable decline in life expectancy, almost according to each stop, as you went east from the very wealthy city into the then much, much less wealthy areas of what we now call Docklands. And I couldn't believe it. And no one got the hump with me, actually. But I think some people were a little bit surprised at my naivety or at my ignorance, my innocence, if I wanted to spin it in a slightly more positive way. And then I think I said things like, well, you know, if the reasons why life expectancy is shorter in poor areas are linked to exercise, diet and substance abuse, that's not unique to poorer people. And I said, you can go for a nice walk wherever you are. And people rang me up and said, well, actually, you can't, James. I think the first time we had this conversation, it was before I lived near the river, which obviously makes me look even more, why don't you just go for a nice walk by the river? Let them eat cake. Mangeons nous brioche. Mangeons-ils brioche. And then, of course, well, you know, posh people like a drink, and someone pointed out to me, yes, and even if they drink a lot, if they're drinking 40-pound bottles of claret, as if they're going out of fashion, it's probably not going to have as deleterious an effect on their health as if they're drinking special brew or white lightning or glorified meths. And I don't know whether that's true. I don't know enough about alcohol, but I do know that your hangover is a lot easier to manage when you've been drinking posh grog than it is when you've been drinking cheap grog. That's why I hate Christmas parties so much, because they give you that glass when you arrive. God knows what's in it. Probably petrol. So that was another point. And then, of course, I think it was Alan Johnson, was it, many moons ago, who said that for poor people, a cigarette can be a moment of real pleasure for them. And I think he got lampooned by that. I may even have lampooned him myself, but I understand what he meant now. The more, I don't want to say bleak, but difficult is the word I'm looking for. The more difficult life is, and there are plenty of very, very rich people who have difficult lives as well, but we're talking in broad terms here. That's what statistical analysis demands. The more difficult your life is, the more tempting it is to take a little holiday from it by having a drink, having a smoke, a tiny little holiday from it, that little rush you get. It's years since I smoked, but I'm not devoid of memories. I understand why it's so addictive. That little brief rush you get makes everything feel a little bit better. So the more difficult your life is, the more tempting it is to chase a little dopamine, you know? Junk food, sugar, tobacco, alcohol. That's just the legal stuff. Smoke a bit of weed. Maybe take a tablet. Whatever it might be, it seems to me fair. I can't prove it, but it seems to me fair to suggest that the tougher life is, the more stresses you've got and the more fears you've got, the more likely you are to seek a little bit of temporary chemical relief, right? So that's another life expectancy issue. And so it went on. But what I want you to tell me now is why you think that life expectancy of newborns in the poorest areas of the country has gone down or is being recalibrated to reflect a decline since 2011. And if you can, then please burst the boundaries of my bubble. So talk to me about lived experience. So I'll tell you why it is, James, because round my way or on my estate, X, Y, and Z happened. And that, to me, is a very powerful reason why they expect babies born on my estate to live less long than they did 10 years ago. 0345 6060973. So you get higher numbers of deaths from drug and alcohol overdoses. Also, suicide among adults under 50 increases in poorer areas. Much lower longevity among women. And I know I've provided you with some answers, but there must be more. I just want to know why. And I know it makes me sound a bit out of touch, but I think if you've been kind enough to listen to this programme for more than 37 seconds, you'll know that I mostly come from a good place when I ask these questions, even if I sometimes sound a little naive and out of touch. Why? In 21st century Britain, in the sixth largest economy in the world, why do rich people live longer? 0345 6060973 is the number you need. And I hesitate to say this because you never know quite where it will lead, but I don't want you to hold back from ringing in on the grounds that you worry that you're stating the bleeding obvious. Because certainly for me at least, when I first addressed these issues, it wasn't bleeding obvious to me, even if it was to you. And if it wasn't bleeding obvious to me when I first turned my attention to these stories, then there'll be hundreds of thousands of people listening, potentially, certainly tens of thousands of people listening today who don't think it's bleeding obvious yet. So don't hold back on those grounds. And why 2011? What would you say from your lived experience, all right? So politics to one side, spectacles on, lived experience. You look out your window, you look up and down your street, you think of the people that you know. What has happened since 2011 that you think might help explain why deprivation in poor areas has cut years off the lives of newborn babies? If I've understood the research from my alma mater, the London School of Economics, if I've understood the research, it's reversible. It is something that, obviously, you measure life expectancy from the ends of lives. So it's not the experiences of the babies that explain this. It's the experience of the adults who are no longer with us. So that means it's reversible. So if you're looking at a reduced life expectancy based on when you were born, if policies change and society changes quickly enough, then your life expectancy will go up again. If I've understood the research, it's possible I haven't, but I think I have. So presume no knowledge or understanding on my part, which, let's be honest, shouldn't be hard, and tell me why, or tell everybody why, you know why rich people live longer. And more powerfully, perhaps, for our purposes this morning, why have poor people seen their life expectancy go down? Some poor people, since 2011. I have the best listeners. I mentioned that I thought that Handel had written The Messiah to raise money for the Foundling Hospital, and one of my esteemed listeners, Richard Bannon, has been in touch. He wrote The Messiah for performance in Dublin in 1742, James. However, he adapted much of it for the Foundling Hospital anthem in 1749. He was the Bob Geldof of the 18th century. It's worth remembering he was also an immigrant. And do you know, such is the nature of my magpie mind, I must take a call, actually. Keith, you can't... I've been talking almost uninterrupted, turning into Steve Allen. I'll be with you imminently, John. Actually, no, I'll be with you now, and then I'll tell you the funny story about Handel and... what's his name? Red and white striped jumper, always disappearing. Jacob Rees-Mogg. John's in Wakefield. John, what made you pick up the phone?
To be honest, it was the bit about you mentioning, as we got specific experiences.
Yes.
That made me think, do you know what? Because I've listened to the show for ages, but I thought, do you know what? I'll give him a call, because I know you like to learn things.
I do.
And you're from the better half of the pond.
No doubt about it.
Background-wise.
Yes.
So I'll start with something a bit conceptual.
Not better, luckier.
Okay, we'll...
No, better in a sense, but there's nothing better about the people in the half of the pond you described. They're just luckier than the people in the other half.
Yeah, I could agree with that. So there's two bits to get across, really. One is a study, which you will no doubt be interested in, and then I'll talk more specifics. It's quicker than it sounds, don't worry.
No, okay.
I would encourage you to read into something called Rat Park.
Okay.
And anybody listening, to be honest, Rat Park was a study they conducted in the 1980s, where they had two separate cages of rats. In one cage, Rat Park, all the rats were free to interact with each other. There was lots of toys, rat wheels, rat slides, and other such fun things for rats to do. The other group, the control group, if you will, what they had in their cage was nothing. Not only that, the rats were all isolated, so they couldn't play, they couldn't socialise, they couldn't get to each other. In each cage, there were 2 bottles of water. One was regular water, one was cocaine water. In Rat Park, every single rat had some of the cocaine water, but not one of them had enough as to cause adverse health effects.
Okay. And
not one of them died. In the other cage, every single rat overdosed to death.
I mean, that is an incredibly powerful piece of science, which I think rings a bell with me, but obviously I haven't got the wherewithal or the facilities to triple check it now. Every single one. I suppose it makes sense, doesn't it? You're talking about neural pathways, and that's, you mention it because of what I said about the worse your life is, the more tempting a bit of a break from it will be.
Exactly. That's why I wanted to call. I mean, anybody interested in this kind of thing, it's called Rat Park. It was in the 1980s. But when we apply that to today,
yes.
Very conscious of on national radio. So we did say about, our experiences.
Yes,
or,
I was about to point out that I don't know if we can file this under lived experience, John, but I sense that's the bit we're heading towards.
I've never been, or am I a rat? But lived experience-wise,
yes.
I'll keep things vague because it's national radio.
It's up to you, mate.
But growing up myself, in what you call an impoverished area, the
yes.
stepfather type figures were known heroin addicts / dealers, and the environment that created for our household. And to be fair, it's not like our next door neighbours were any better off. The whole place was just you cannot imagine a more impoverished estate.
I think
and when I look at the I myself, after years of counselling, I have a decent job now, to be fair. I drive around quite a lot. I'm a sales rep, listen to your show regularly. However, I'm one of 7. The other 6 are all adults now.
Yeah.
In and out of prison, drug addicts, alcoholics, every single person, more or less. Yeah, I go as far to say, I mean, 1 in 7 there, you can work out a rough percentage, but it's higher than that. When I look at the estate that I grew up on and the people that I knew, the people I kind of used to hang around with, the reality is that we talk about the kind of life expectancies going down.
Yes.
Things were that bad then, and they're only getting worse now, because the people I know who are still in that kind of environment, they've now got children, except things like education and maintenance allowance, which for me when I was a kid was £30 a week. That £30 a week meant I could afford to eat and go to college. They're getting rid of it. If it's not already gone, somebody can check that, of course. Yes. The means that were available
I think it
for
went
me
a while
to climb
ago,
out of.
EMA.
You might well have. It's been a while since I was in college. But the point I'm making is that the means that were available to assist me in climbing out of the hole I was born into have been stripped away systematically. I'm continuing to be stripped away systematically. So when people look at 47-year-old Greg and they say, he's a heroin addict, it's his own stupid fault. Firstly, it's not. I draw your attention to Rat Park. Yes. Secondly, even if it was his stupid fault, which it's not, it's certainly not his children's fault. And what people forget so often, and certainly the likes of, I don't want to make things political, but I'm sure you can think of people who might fall into this category, as they're so quick to shame the parents who made these, who were stupid enough to be born into a poor family.
Mate,
what did they pick that for?
They've tried to shame people that died in Grenfell Tower. I don't think we need to join the dots here, do we?
Well, to try to keep things
I know.
Well, I suppose it is political. I suppose you can't take the politics out of it. But the reality is, and we talk about these drops in life expectancies, people being born into the kind of situations I was born into, it's quite frankly a miracle I'm now in the position I'm in. If I was born into that same position, but 5 years ago, instead of 31 years ago, I would not stand a chance, quite frankly.
What would be the biggest changes, do you think?
Well, for a start, I wouldn't have been able to afford to go to college.
Yeah, that's what got you out, education.
My escape route was £30 a month if you went to college.
Yeah.
Which, quite frankly, the first time I got given £30 at age 16 into my bank, that was the most money I'd ever held in my hand in my life. I had never before held any more than a £5 personally in my hand. God. So to get £30 a week, that was then, I can get the bus to college, I can buy some books, I can buy some pens, I can study, and then I can go to university. There was help available, there was support available, the loans, the maintenance grants they gave me for university, it paid for my first year's rent. So I went to university. To be fair, I didn't actually stay at university.
Right.
But I studied law. I had this romantic notion I could put the bad guys in prison. What a joke that turned out to be. But what I was able to do... I know, right. But what I was able to do with that was move to a big city.
Oh, your horizons.
Yeah. So I moved to a big city.
You got off the estate, right? That was the biggest thing of all.
My first year's rent was paid for. I went into Burton's and I bought a very ill-fitting suit, I must admit.
We've all been there. Did it have one button?
You know what? I can't quite remember.
Well, you're younger than me.
All I can remember is thinking at the time, I looked quite dapper.
Absolutely, I'm sure you did.
To sit in front of interviewers and just multiple of them to tell me you're a bit rough around the edges. But I tell you what, I do like your enthusiasm. Eventually, one of them, it was a recruitment company of all companies.
Yes.
Eventually, one of them said, you know what, you're going to take a lot of work, but I'll give you a chance. Fast forward, what is it now? 10, 15 years. I own a house. I pay more taxes than I ever thought would. Yeah. Quite frankly, I contribute. My position now is completely unrecognisable from the beginnings. But the point I'm making here is that as we strip back all of the support networks, all of the opportunities, all of the mechanisms by which somebody could drag themselves to a point higher than where they started, I don't know if any are even left. I'd say they're being stripped away, but I'd probably go as far to say they're just gone. And when I look at my brothers, my friends, my cousins, I love them all dearly, of course, but I can't look at them and see which else of them have managed to kind of beat the trap, for want of a better phrase.
You don't need a better phrase. That's the perfect phrase.
They all started in that same position. Yeah. But the point is that now, anybody faced with that same challenge today, it was hard then. It was really hard back then. Years of therapy and kind of recovering drug addiction of my own. Yes. I'm kind of, I'm over the hill, as it were. I'm good.
Over the hump. I wasn't. You're not over the hill. You're over the hump.
Over the hump. Whereas to face that same challenge, if I had to face that same challenge tomorrow, in today's world, I'm not so sure I could.
Well, the escape route's gone.
God help anybody, and this is the crux of it. The Greg, who's 47 and is a blah blah blah, he should know better. Yeah. Ooh, shun him, shame him. The children born into that family who most certainly did not pick that dad. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? They most certainly did not choose to be born into such a grim house, quite frankly, such a grim life. That's the bit that people miss. So if you grow up in such an environment, the maladaptive coping mechanisms you acquire over the years, you are overwhelmingly likely to have a crippling drug addiction by the time you're of a certain age, particularly when drugs are going around the estate at as young as 13, 14.
And that is sees an increase in drug and alcohol overdoses and in suicides as well, of course. It's not very confusing.
For it as well.
This isn't confusing to you, is it?
Science,
no.
Because as somebody who's lived it, and people say, "Oh well, why did he?" And
pull your socks up. Come on, pull your socks up.
The example I always use is: imagine. This isn't personal, by the way. Imagine you're a very successful radio presenter.
Yes.
You own multiple properties. You've got a good life, a good social life. Nobody wakes up one day and says, "Do you know what? It's a lovely day. The sun's shining. The birds are singing. Today's the day I become a heroin addict." That's not. That's not how it happens. There are steps. You trace it back. People who turn to such drastic, inverted commas, solutions. It's not a solution, of course, but people who turn to such channels, they are already in a place that's darker than you can ever imagine. Assuming, of course, you're in a happy, well-to-do existence. Because the reality is that people living that existence, good for them.
Yeah.
But that they couldn't possibly understand the forces at work to push.
So they can take their empathy so far, I guess. But they can never live it. They can never know it. They can never imagine it to the level of knowledge. You just can't. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do this. I would. Oddly, this radio presenter, although he doesn't have multiple properties, can just about imagine it, but only just. And it is only imagining. John, that's an incredible call, and I'm so grateful to you. And I'm sorry I have to curtail it, but I'm already rather late for the news. A lot of love coming in for you, but I don't mean that in a sentimental fashion. I mean that as gratitude. James, that call just before the news was one of the most powerful I've ever heard on any programme. That guy should be made an advisor to any incoming government. That's just a flavour of the responses to the call we took a moment ago from John in Wakefield. And if you missed it, I'm sure it'll be available later via all the usual avenues. But it was a simple description of his life as an answer to the question of why life expectancy in poor areas has come down since 2011. And I don't know what you took away from it, but I took away the escape route that the education maintenance allowance provided him with. I can't remember, and I'm not even going to check, because that's not the point of this conversation. I can't remember whether it was the coalition government or the last days of the Labour government that took it away. It feels like an austerity-related. When I say that it's not political, I think I should stress I don't want it to be party political, partly because I no longer recognise party politics. I guess there's a recalibration underway at the moment. But the idea that somebody like Ken Clarke is either a good guy or a bad guy, and depending on what you think about Ken Clarke, you must therefore think the opposite about Chris Williamson. That just doesn't work for me anymore. That's all. So when I say that, I mean party political. I don't mean political. Of course it's political. Everything is political. And I guess at this point it's only right for me to remind you that Boris Johnson boasted recently that nobody stuck up for the bankers as much as I did when he was Mayor of London. Because, of course, the rationale, the reasons given for austerity were that the global financial crisis in 2008 had to be addressed by, as Alexei Sayle famously put it, closing libraries in Wolverhampton. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. I'm reeling from that call, but in a good way. That's why we come to work every day. But there's room for more answers. And you don't have to have lived it. You might have observed it. Like Mark, you might have got out of that world. But that sentence he said, if I'd been born 5 years ago, I wouldn't have got out. I don't know that, and I know what you're thinking. You're thinking what I'm thinking. He sounded like the kind of fella who would probably prevail in any circumstances. And I'm going to tell you something now that I probably shouldn't, all right? When I talk to people like Mark, I always wonder what would have happened to him if he'd gone to a school like mine. If you're new to the programme, I went to a good top of the rank public school. And I always wonder, because they're great lads I went to school with, but even kids in the C stream have ended up doctors or making a ton of money in the city. Or that line about horizons, didn't even finish university, but it got him off the estate. How would someone like that have done in life if they'd gone to a school like mine? And how would someone like me have done in life if I'd grown up on an estate like his? In fact, let's go a little bit further while we're here. How do you think the J-Dog would have fared in life if he'd grown up as one of Mark's 6 siblings? 8 minutes after 12. Matthew is in Thanet. Matthew, what would you like to say?
Just to say, it's absolutely political. I mean, I'm a head teacher, and we've seen in one of the poorest areas of the country, there's a 10-year gap between the richest and the poorest area in Kent in terms of life expectancy. Just
in a single county. I knew it's big on a national scale, but in Kent alone, you've got a decade.
Yeah, and if you live in a poor area as a child, you're 2.5 times more likely to die, according to the Child Action Group, in childhood. And the reasons for that, I mean, there's obviously many reasons for it, but not least the fact that in our area it's very difficult for people to get a GP. So preventable diseases, cancers, and things are all picked up late. The decisions that have been made around housing, around benefits, means that we have children that are coming to school daily hungry, who tell us that their parents are making decisions about whether they choose to turn on the heating or to feed them. We've got children living with significant mental health issues, and we've got an 18-month waiting list for CAMS. We have... Just
say that again. I mean, CAMS is Child and Young Adult Mental Health Services. An 18-month... Well, I know a bit about this, and I mean, the bit... I almost hesitate to say this, but sometimes the only way in which you can get seen by CAMS is if you've actually made an attempt as a child. If you've made an attempt on your own life, if you're having
still 3 months.
Shut up.
So you try and commit suicide. You will go to hospital. You'll be seen by somebody there, and they will organise an emergency appointment for you. That'll be 2 to 3 months.
I thought I knew the worst. It depends on each borough, doesn't it? But you're describing one of the poorest parts of the country, and also, not to labour the point, but you're also describing why these areas routinely vote in a way that many of us find very hard to understand. Why would the poorest people in the country vote? Because if you can't get an appointment at the doctor's and someone has written in the paper that it's because of all the foreigners, you're going to believe it.
That's it, and you're angry, and the children that I work with are angry, and in fact, anger is the wrong word. I mean, one of the things I think I often describe it as is a sort of community depression, because anger actually helps you to get out of these things, but actually there's a depression sometimes that says, whatever you do, whatever happens, nothing is going to change. Yeah,
surrender.
I mean, a little girl, 13, 14-year-old girl, was saying in class the other day that it didn't matter what qualifications she got, because if she was lucky, she would work at a supermarket.
How do you address that, Matthew?
Well, it's hard. I mean, we do a lot of work. I mean, the whole of my year 7, we took out to Oxford University. And I get mocked by people and called patronising. But
who call? Well, I mean, I suppose I could probably work it out. But what kind of people call you patronising?
Quite often, some of the right wing people in the area, some of the people who ought to know better, frankly.
Well, it's know your place stuff. How dare you show these kids? I mean, I can almost assemble a claim that it's cruel to show them life inside the sweet shop, because then they'll just spend their life with their faces pressed up to the sweet shop window. But what's the alternative, Matthew? As a head teacher, what are you supposed to do? Teach these kids that they are worthless, that they are going nowhere?
Well, absolutely not, and that is what we do. And one of the things that is so difficult as a teacher and as a head teacher in an area like this is that we get slated by everybody. I mean, the wards that serve my school are 3 of the poorest 30 in the country.
Yeah.
I have over 10% of my children on some kind of child protection or early help services. And the stories that we've got children that have been trafficked around the country into brothels, and so we do our best to get them qualifications. And my belief is that education turns around lives, and that by getting children qualifications, we will do it. We don't exclude children at my school. We've had 0 fixed term exclusions since it's been a year. We don't permanently exclude children, whatever they do.
That's incredible.
Because what that just causes more damage. But
if they've already surrendered and then you give up on them, then God knows.
But instead of being praised for it, and I don't do it because we get praised for it, but instead of being praised for it, we get hammered. Because our GCSE results are compared to the schools you're talking about.
Yeah, no, of course you are. Do you know, talking to you and John, who I think I might have referred to as Mark for the last few minutes, judging by a couple of my tweets, so my apologies for that. But as I said, I am reeling from that call. Between you and John, if I had to provide a one-word answer to the question of why, it's hope, isn't it?
Yeah. And there was stuff that came out of the Second World War where the Germans actually deliberately destroyed hope in some of the Jewish concentration camps. So if you've read about this, where they made the Jewish prisoners move a pile of earth and stones and things from one end of the camp to the other to see what the impact of and then they moved it back again. It was a pointless activity. And they found that those people died quicker and more of them died than those that were working in the fields and doing something that had some value.
Crikey. Why do you do it? How old are you? Do you mind me asking that?
I'm nearly the same age as you. I'm 45.
Well, you're a better man than me, Matthew. You really are. How do you keep your hope alive, if you don't mind me asking?
Because we see the difference it makes. So, I've got a girl in my school last year. In fact, many of them, but I'll give you a couple of stories. We've got a girl...
Actually, can I bring you back after the break? Because I don't want to squeeze you. So I think we all need to know how someone like you keeps their hope when those of us who aren't at the coalface perhaps sometimes struggle to hold on to ours. So we'll come back to Matthew in Thanet, a head teacher, if you're just tuning in, describing a 10-year age gap between the poorest and the wealthiest people in his home county. There's no R in that word, home county. So how the hell does he keep his hope alive when there is so little of it around him? We'll find out after this. Some of us are shocked to discover that deprivation in poor areas cuts years off the lives of newborns. Some of us are not, like John, who essentially explained his own childhood as a key to understanding why this statistic is utterly unsurprising to him. And then, from a different perspective, but examining the same evidence, Matthew in Thanet, who's a head teacher in one of the poorest parts of the country, and sees every day things that the rest of us probably struggle to believe even exist. So we parted a moment ago, and I'd asked him how he keeps his hope alive. And you're about to tell us, Matthew, no pressure.
We have so many success stories. We have, for instance, a girl that who was heavily involved in the gangs to the point, at one point, of having a gun held to her head, who is now in our sixth form and will be going off to university. Last year, in our year 11s, we only had 2 children that we didn't get into employment, education or training. And that's despite of the lives that some of those kids have had. Yes. And so, and I have an amazing team. I mean, the great thing I think about working in an area like Thanet, in the schools in Thanet, is that people work there because they want to. They work there because they absolutely care about the children that.
But you're not just a teacher, are you? Really, from what I'm hearing, I don't know how I would describe you, but when the image I have in my mind of a teacher is a fraction of what you do.
No, absolutely, and we own that. I mean, we wash children's clothes, we feed kids breakfast, we take kids into hospital when we need to. We fight with social services, the police, other things when we need to. And police, I'm not criticising those services; they're as stretched as we are. But our view and my view is that education is a huge part of what we do, obviously. But actually, we have a responsibility to do the best for our kids. And so, I mean, for instance, we've just worked with an optician, so that there's an optician that's coming into our school to test a kid's eyesight, because it doesn't happen for them. My hope in the future is that we can get GPs and things, because many of our kids don't have GPs, and that we can get dentists and things in, and it's that kind of drive. It's actually will make these children's lives better.
And you sounded a little bit glib when I said you're a better man than me, but you by most available measures, you clearly are, because your reward is other people's happiness.
Yeah, I don't know.
I know you're not comfortable with the compliment, but they're tough, right? It's my show, my rules. That's the bottom line here. So you could probably earn more money doing something else. You could certainly have less stress doing something else, but something about the way you're made means that this is what gives you pleasure. This is what gives you fulfillment and satisfaction.
Yeah, definitely, and that's why I don't deserve praise for it. Really, it is. I love what I do. I mean,
I get that.
Sometimes it hurts incredibly, and the problem we have. I mean, one of the things I have to do when I'm working with my safeguarding team is to reassure them that as a school, we're doing everything we can and more. When the question I ask all the time to my staff and to myself is this good enough for my child? And the problem is that the answer is no, it's absolutely not.
But it's the best we can get for this child.
But there's nothing more we can do, and that's why. I mean, I just hope, and I know that's not to be political, but I just hope that the political winds change.
Political.
I hope the political winds change, because to me it's utterly shameful, and then you add on to it the kind of vitriol that says that describes my parents as scribers and all this kind of nastiness that comes to the Daily Mail and Co.
It does, and I mean, what about the denial, the reality denial, rather than the negative portrayals? The people who claim that what you've just described isn't true. I mean, I kind of have my own largely amused attitude to these people, but I also feel sorry for them in a genuine, charitable way. I don't know that I could do if I was doing what you do every day. How do you deal with the people who simply say that's not true, you don't wash their clothes? And if you do, I know the stereotypes about the parents, but it still displays a callousness to the children, even if you are blaming it on the parents, because it's not, as John reminded us, it's nothing to do with the babies. It's nothing to do with the children where and when they were born.
I think there's a mixture of things. I mean, one of the things that I've done over the last year is I've spoken about the work we do to help kids out of county lines and gangs and things. And you've got some really good people who just don't want to believe it. And one of the things that I do that's
such a beautiful way of putting it. They're good people, but they don't want to believe it because it will haunt them.
Yeah. And I mean, we had Ofsted come in a couple of years back. They're due again, unfortunately. They came in, and one of the things that I did, and it was a bit of a risk really, is that I put them with some of our ex-gang children and children that are really struggling, and the inspector came back in tears, saying that actually what you're doing is saving lives. And again, you could tell that when he'd come into the school, and they came into the school saying, "Look, you're rubbish,"
because they're measuring you by the objective metrics, which means they're comparing your school to my school.
Yeah, and so they came in and said, "Look, we're going to be putting you in special measures." And actually, they came out saying that the work that you're doing here is outstanding. I mean, they couldn't give us outstanding because the criteria doesn't allow that.
But that's such a damning indictment of the criteria, isn't it? And it's the difference between getting a kid from an E to a D, as opposed to getting a kid to an A. In many ways, it's a much greater gift to society to get a kid from an E to a C than it is to get a kid from a B to an A, which parents like mine.
And did you know that government policy is that they won't invest in schools that they consider to be failing? So we have my school, and then again, you just think about this: kids are living in homes that are cold.
Yeah.
And up until last year, the school had a 1960s boiler that broke down every year. So the school was cold, and the reason why the government wouldn't give us money to replace that boiler and fix it is because we were not a good school. The government policy is that if a school is struggling in difficulties, they won't give it money, which to me in a common sense way seems insane. I mean, what they say is it's market forces. We support the good schools and the schools in
market forces. There it is again.
Yeah.
Incredible.
But I mean, the whole thing is that a market forces doesn't serve areas like this. So I mean, I've got friends who know people who came into the area as a GP, and they found that it was so depressing and difficult to work in Thanet as a GP, they left. So we have those GP shortages, we have dentist shortages, we have all of those things. We have the lack of the good food and all of those things.
Thanet as we
the area.
I hear you.
And it describes many places in the country, I would have thought.
Yeah, well, and again, the Thanet is almost a byword for the sort of political forces that see people encouraged to blame their problems on incomers when there often aren't any. But you know that better than I do. In the unlikely event that I can ever do anything to help you out, Matthew, please ask, won't you?
Thank you.
I mean it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James.
Yourself. All right, take care. 27 minutes after 12. Again, how would you have fared if you'd gone to a school like that? How would Boris Johnson have fared if he'd gone to a school like that? How would Jeremy Corbyn have fared if he'd gone to a school like that? How would I have fared if I'd gone to a school like that? Gaz is in Manchester. Gaz, what would you like to say?
I want to echo what the other two callers have said.
Go on.
I work on the front line, really, in social housing. So I'm in and outside people's houses every day, in some really deprived areas.
Yeah.
At the minute, I'm off because I'm struggling with my mental health.
I'm sorry, mate.
So I've sort of called time on it for a week just to look after myself.
Good for you.
Now, I noticed in myself that I wasn't well.
Yeah.
Getting home, stuck in a rut, couple of cans, go to sleep, wake up, do the same thing, stressed out.
Yeah.
I'm doing all right. I've got my own house, married, got a kid. If you haven't got your own house, if you're renting, if you're struggling, if you're down to a £5 a week, that little cig at the back door, or that pooling your money together and getting a load of cheap cider or whatever, and doing them sort of things is the only escape you have, then it's not surprising that we get headlines like we have today.
Just to forget about life. It's that phrase, I can't remember what song it's in, to forget about life for a while, Gaz. And then the tougher life is, the more tempting it is to do something, however unhealthy it might be, to forget about life for a while.
Because I've lived it and I'm all right. It's only through my own awareness that I know how to escape it. If you haven't got that awareness, all the support.
No, you do sometimes need to be taught. They're simple tools sometimes to look after yourself with, but if no one's ever shown them to you, you don't know how to use them. You don't even know you've got them, do you?
No, and so, people can sit there all they want and say, single mum, drop the kids off, why is she not going to work?
Yeah.
But there's nothing there. There's no help. It took me, from leaving school, quite a bit of help to get on a scheme, get an apprenticeship, get my qualifications. All that's gone, and all that's gone for a fact.
It's an echo of what John in Wakefield told us, is that, the ladders...
I had a chance and I took it.
The escape
Some
routes and the
people need
ladders.
more than one.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
But we can't just give up on it. Is that the kind of society we live in? Oh, you've had 11 years in compulsory education. You've not done what you should have done. That's it.
On your jog. Well, I don't know. You know, my abiding mystery is someone who thankfully is not versed in these problems, either as a professional like the last caller, or like Gaz or John, who've lived it, Matthew, the head teacher, whether you're helping with the problems or whether you're fighting your way out of the problems. I've just not got those things in my life, thank goodness. But I do know this, the big mystery of politics for me will always be how people in these dire situations are still so susceptible to snake oil, to the people whispering in their ears. And if you really want a clinching argument, why do you think the right-wing media is constantly bombarding you with stories about gender-neutral sausage rolls? It's because they know that if you knew what you heard today, and you heard it all the time, and you read about it all the time, up with it you would not put. So let's all get cross about gender-neutral sausage rolls. I might summon in the Usherwood, take one more call, and then catch up on the state of British politics. Should we summon the Usherwood? No? All right. I'll take the call, then I'll summon the Usherwood. It's 25 minutes to 1. Jason is in Leeds. Jason, what made you pick up the phone? It's an odd show. Well, not an odd show today, but it's a bit different. What's on your mind, mate?
Yeah, the thing that made me pick up the call was obviously John's call.
Yes. Just up the road.
Just very close to me, and I grew up in an area very close to possibly the Wakefield estate that John was maybe growing up on. Yeah. It's the resonation. It's what resonates with you regarding his life experiences. You know, we've got probably similar life experiences, but one of the things that I don't think comes across is the fact that it's what stays with you from those life experiences. You know, no matter how old you get, no matter what position you find yourself in life, it never leaves you. You are constantly looking over your shoulder, waiting for this thing to come back, to catch up, to bring you back down. It just never, ever seems to be off your back. I mean, my life experiences were very similar to John's. We grew up in a situation which was quite deprived. We had nothing as growing up. I think you have to forgive me, I'm not sure how much I want to say on it.
No, well, you say whatever you want to say, and whatever you don't want to say, don't say. I understand precisely the point that you're making. I don't want to step out of line here, but did you hear the amount of weight that John placed on therapy?
Yes. And again...
Go on.
The problem is accessing therapy.
I know it is. But that is, in my... understanding that whatever you are haunted by from your past, therapy is the way to address it, and you can. I think if John was here, he would say, and he'd acknowledge how hard it can be to access it, but he'd say you don't have to spend your whole life looking over your shoulder.
It's a strange thing, and like I say, I've lived my life with various life experiences. I mean,
yes.
Like I said to your researcher, my first 7 years of my life, from being a child till the time that my dad left, we had no electricity in the house. We'd had the electricity cut off for all that period of time, so we grew up with nothing. We never had heating, we never had lights, and that was just the norm. And it wasn't just, like John said, we weren't the only ones. You know, there were others in that scenario.
Most of your neighbours, or certainly most of John's neighbours, from what I understood of his contribution, would be in similar circumstances.
Exactly. It's not uncommon, so you don't feel out of place. You think that that's the norm.
Yeah.
But as you grow, I mean, my father left when I was 7, and from that point, never saw again. And then we were raised in various situations, but... You know, we went through periods of homelessness, periods of constant moving around. By the time you get to school age, you are not stable. You're not able to focus on anything. So school is just something you go through the motions. Most of the time you don't turn up. Most of the time you don't take part. You can't focus. You know, homework is set that you've got no hope of doing, so you just don't bother.
Teachers are going to let you walk on by as long as you don't cause any You know,
I mean,
as long as you're quiet in your dysfunction and not disruptive in your dysfunction, they'll give you a free pass to carry on doing nothing.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a little bit older than John. At the time I'm talking about, I was born in the early 70s, so
Sure.
you know, I'm slightly older than yourself. But I mean, the other part that made me recall was we sat down. I've got two young daughters. Well, I'd say the younger, 12 and 14, and they wanted to watch the Dispatches program last night.
Yes, about poverty and hunger and childhood poverty, child poverty.
And we had to sit down and explain to my youngest daughter that is very similar to the life experiences that I grew up in, and explain to them that you can hopefully find a way out of it if stability can be provided.
And, of course, the phone-in today, or at least the story that's inspired this phone-in, suggests very strongly that it is becoming harder to break out of that cycle than it was when you were a kid. Incredible though that sounds to you and to John, that's what the story suggests.
It seems very much that unless you've got people like John who are able to build a framework from which he can springboard stability towards raising his child, raising his children, and giving them that groundwork, that the future seems bleak and not within your own control. You just have to roll with it and take whatever you can.
That's the thing, isn't it?
Through to the next.
You're still haunted by that, aren't you? By that thought.
Well, it's the thing of the curveballs that life throw you at times.
Of course it is.
I, very much like John, I left school with no qualifications.
Yeah.
School was just pointless.
It's just marking time.
But I managed to get a chance. Someone gave me a chance, and I was able to work my way through into a fairly good career at some point. I was a higher rate taxpayer. You're able to break out of the mold if people will give you that chance.
Yeah.
But life throws curveballs at you. My wife became ill some time ago, which that then pulls the rug out from under you again.
Yes.
And so it's the constant, not being able to just settle in a space where you can look forward and plan to go forward. You are always, always looking over your shoulder to make sure that you're not going to fall back into that. And it never seems, one of the questions that you asked was, why is there this reduced life expectancy? And for people that can resonate with these sort of calls, that can relate, there's going to be that understanding that the weight of this thing that presses down on you, because you go through life thinking that you don't belong, that you're not good enough, that you don't occupy the same space as other people, that it takes a lot of...
That you deserve it. This is your place. This is your lot. This is it. Doff cap, tug forelock, suck it up.
Yeah, ironically, yeah. I mean, it's an hard one to justify to yourself and to explain to others.
You were explaining it brilliantly, Jason. At least
you fight so much against it, and it really beats you down. You talk about therapy, and there are
cautiously. I wasn't suggesting there was any magic bullet or anything like that, but I thought it was interesting that John talked about it. Was more the point that I was making.
There are, if you can get onto those programs, then I'm sure they can help. But it's that. There's also the stubbornness of people like ourselves, like me.
Don't need that.
Where when you do that, when you go for that help, you're kind of admitting the failure, which seems really strange, but that makes it worse because you're saying to yourself, I wasn't good enough to deal with this.
Especially as a man of our generation, we're raised to think that asking for help is weakness.
True.
And it isn't.
Again, true.
Sorry, Matt. You could win the prize for stating the bleeding obvious today, won't it?
No, it's that thing of I've had to accept that in myself and like you say, I still, whilst this thing bears weighty on me, I still class myself as lucky.
Yes. You've got love in your life.
Because I've got people who have helped me through. But more to the point, they've been patient with me.
Yes.
And they have been willing to listen and help and not judge. And I think a lot of people, you know, people like Matthew, you're the head teacher, you know, the help and support that people like those offer is phenomenal and needed. And how they have the sense to go in day after day. Because I couldn't do what he does.
Nor could I. Absolutely no doubt about it. Not in a million, well, maybe in a million years. Do you know, listening to you, it's all slotted into place. Like this astonishing trio of calls today. I mean, the three in particular, perhaps, that have just slotted everything together. Because what you've done is remind us that even if, like John, you get out, then there's still a very real risk of being haunted by it. And if you're haunted by it having got out, and remember, we're addressing the question of life expectancy and its relationship with poverty, and we're wondering why it's going down in the poorest parts of the country since 2011. If it never leaves you when you've got out, imagine the weight bearing down upon the people who never got out. And there's your answer to both questions, I think.
It never, ever goes away. You are always looking for that crutch, that support mechanism to take you beyond, to get you through. It's
anaesthetic, and it might come from the bottom of the bottle, or it might come from, I mean, who knows where it will come. Sex, sometimes. Any form of addiction that takes you out of yourself for a few minutes is almost irresistible, the more difficult your existence is.
Yeah, I mean, it's removing yourself from the reality that you live to just a moment of something that can give you, I don't know, just a different headspace.
Empty heads. You empty your head completely.
Yeah.
It's so easy to say, so hard to do. Mate, you're a star. I hope you'll let me say that, Jason.
It's your show. You can say what you wish.
Oh, this is very true. Finally, someone who understands the rules of engagement. But I really mean it. You're a legend, and it's one of the cruelest ironies of life that simply being all right doesn't actually come with any bonus prizes, does it? But can I ask you one thing without you getting cross with me? When you showed the girls, when you explained to the girls last night that that's how Daddy grew up, surely the cuddle, the love that they gave you then, that heals a lot of wounds.
We have very little in life, but I'm the richest person in the world for those two people being in my life, without a shadow of a doubt.
That rings a bell.
Yeah, there's no richer person. The joy they bring and the pride I have in them is immense. And without them, I probably wouldn't be here. As bad a claim as that is,
I understand. I'm not going to argue with you.
For them. And my wife, because without those trio around me, I think the battle would have been lost a long time ago.
Look after yourself, mate.
You too.
Oh, God bless. Like you, I found the last hour and so of radio to be utterly illuminating, and I don't, not depressing actually, or a bit bleak though some of the pictures painted are. I think hope has shone through every one of these calls in a way that, well, I really thank you for. Seriously, change of pace now, change of gear. Summon the Usherwood. Blimey, that was quick.
Here I am. Just very quickly to pick up on educational maintenance allowance, because one of your earlier callers, John,
changed his life.
£30 a week he received for anybody with an income less than £20,817 per year. It was abolished, one of the first acts of the coalition, back in October 2010.
And we are tracking a decline in life expectancy that is dated from 2011, just two short months later.
So
coincidence? Quite possibly.
That was just to pick up on at that point.
Well, I appreciate it. You're almost like a human fact-checker. What have we got today? What's going on in the world of politics?
Ofcom has
Shush, careful, God bless their souls, and all who sail in them.
Ofcom, which is the regulator of people like us, radio stations and television stations, networks, has come down and has made a ruling that Channel 4, when it replaced Boris Johnson, who didn't want to take part in the climate change debate with other party leaders, Nigel Farage didn't want to take part, but when they replaced him with an ice sculpture, and you'll remember Michael Gove, who was previously Environment Secretary and then Minister for No Deal Planning, turned up with Stanley Johnson, Boris Johnson's father, and demanded to take part in that debate.
Stanley Johnson, you fact-check me, Stanley Johnson was already in the spin room. So
he was already in the spin room, yes.
He wasn't part of a kind of... I mean, Gove turned up and asked if he could play with the leaders. He was apparently turned up at Old Trafford on Sunday asking if he could play at left back. Very nearly got a game. But yes, and then the complaint was that the Channel 4 had somehow done something wrong by replacing the man who refused to turn up with an ice sculpture.
Yes, so Michael Gove wanted to take part, but of course he wasn't allowed to take part because he's not the leader of the Conservative Party.
There was a clue in the title, Leaders Debate,
yes.
Wasn't there? Yes.
And of course the Channel 4 said, well, actually the other leaders would have refused to take part because Michael Gove wasn't the leader of the Conservative Party. Anyway, Lee Kane, who is the Prime Minister's Director of Communications, and wrote to Ofcom to complain, and also threatened, there was also a threat from a Conservative source that the Tories, if they win a majority, would abolish Channel 4's public service broadcasting
Swiftly
licence.
Denied, but nonetheless reported.
Yes.
It's almost like the game plan is really flipping obvious, isn't it?
So anyway, Ofcom has now made a decision about Lee Kane's letter, and it's decided, in this case, the election committee, which is from Ofcom, concluded that across the 1 hour's debate and the subsequent news programme, Channel 4 use of editorial techniques ensured that the Conservatives' viewpoint on climate and environmental issues was adequately reflected and given due weight. Therefore, it doesn't uphold the Conservative Party complaint. It says broadcasters have an editorial freedom in determining the format of any election debate. Depending on the circumstances, they may choose to proceed without having agreed the participation of a particular political party or politician, providing they take steps to ensure the programme complies with our due impartiality and election rules. It's important, this statement, because there will be elections in the future, and it does set down a remit that if people don't want to take part in debates, Channel 4 was the first one, to my knowledge, that actually said, well, we're going to go ahead anyway with that debate, and they've gone ahead, and Ofcom has made a ruling that they were right to do so.
As usual, but also, of course, the other strand of that reasoning is that we need some sort of independent regulator in the way that they have in America, because it's only since 2010 that these debates have even been a thing. So you shouldn't have broadcasters or political parties exercising discretion over what they do and don't do. So if it was regulated and compulsory, then these problems wouldn't arise. But it has arisen in this case. But do you know what I nearly tweeted that day? But I didn't, just in case Ofcom went the other way. I couldn't imagine them going the other way, but I just thought, I'll hold fire on this one. It seemed to me to be really obvious what was going on, because I see it in conjunction with the continuing refusal of the Prime Minister to follow Jeremy Corbyn into Andrew Neil's studio.
Yes.
And that meant that the base, as it were, needed a Trump-style comeback. They needed to be given something they could, without really understanding what was going on, they could just wave it in the air and go, yay, yay. And that by submitting that complaint, it gave them the chance to say that, oh, well, yeah, but look at Channel 4, they did that and this and that, and not addressing any of the criticism being made of the Prime Minister for not following Jeremy Corbyn into Andrew Neil's studio, but giving people something to say, which is why I'm surprised and impressed. And I know I would say this anyway, God bless Ofcom and all who sail in her, but I am surprised and impressed by the speed of this decision, because if there was some sort of obfuscation underway here, it has essentially been scotched.
Yes, and the other thing to follow up on that is that in the wake of that debate, nobody was actually talking about climate issues, the threat to the planet. They were talking about the fact that Michael Gove had turned up and wasn't allowed to go
process, not policy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and that also.
Do you think this Lee Kane character might have been assembling his Ofcom complaint while the BBC were on the phone trying to actually set up a date for Boris Johnson to go into it? I mean, that might be the reason why, that maybe he didn't get the messages because he was too busy submitting this outwardly quite spurious complaint to Ofcom.
So,
Theo won't comment.
I can't. What can I say?
Carry on. What else are you here for? Donald Trump's in town.
Donald Trump's in town. Jeremy Corbyn.
Got me an interview?
No. Jeremy Corbyn has also sat down on the sofa, this morning's sofa.
What, Philip and Holly?
Holly, not Holly.
I said Holly. Philip and Holly. Holly. Alderman Hawley Artingstall.
He's sat down and he's
trolling me now. He's done this morning. Are you winding me up?
And he's apologised for anti-Semitism.
Oh, good.
Here is your opportunity now to apologise to the Jewish community for any anti-Semitism by Labour members.
Our party has... Our party... Can I make it clear?
Just say sorry.
Wait a minute. I and our party...
No, just say sorry.
Can I say something?
Well,
our party...
I want you to say sorry.
And our party and me...
Yeah.
Do not accept anti-Semitism in any form.
So are you sorry for anything that's happened?
Obviously, I'm very sorry for everything that's happened. But I want to make this clear. I am dealing with it. I have dealt with it. Other parties are also affected by anti-Semitism. Candidates have been withdrawn by the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives and by us because of it. We just do not accept it in any form whatsoever.
Just to remind you, James, there are 130 cases of anti-Semitism which are between the National Executive Committee, that's the ruling body of the Labour Party, and the National Constitutional Committee.
Allegations of anti-Semitism, not cases.
Well, cases, allegations. Well, they're cases.
It's very important. They're allegations of anti-Semitism. They're not examples of anti-Semitism.
Well, you have a police case.
Yes.
And it's a police case, and then it's closed.
Just to
I mean, it's
clarify,
not,
they might not all be up.
But I'm not saying it's a slam dunk. I'm just saying it's a case.
Good.
And it's 130
Sorry,
cases.
I don't know why I'm wasting my breath trying to curry favour with the converted on that one, but it was worth pointing out. And do you have the numbers at your fingertips of all the Conservative councillors suspended, etc., for
No, I don't.
Islamophobia?
But we were dealing with...
No, I know. I just wondered. I'm just trying to get the interview with Jezza, because if he's done Holly and Philip, I must be in with a chance.
There are 130 cases where allegations of anti-Semitism have been made. They are being investigated by the Labour Party. The reason I point to those is because they have been deemed significant enough that the subcommittee of the National Executive Committee, which is the governing body of the Labour Party, thinks that they need to go to the body within the Labour Party that is the only body within the Labour Party that can rule on whether those individuals should be kicked out of the party or not.
Thank you very much. So that was an unequivocal apology, albeit with that little, not petulant, that would be the wrong word, but the slightly pedantic exchange at the beginning. I love it when Philip Schofield goes all kind of Dan Rather. I do think that's highly enjoyable. But
he didn't. It would matter because he didn't apologise last week,
and he did this week. But so theoretically, all the people that criticised him last week should shut up now. What's the likelihood of that on a scale of 1 to 10?
Yes, but they'd also point to the fact that why didn't you simply to Jeremy Corbyn? Why didn't you apologise last week when you had the opportunity?
So he can't win. Because he already had apologised.
But if he had apologised,
he didn't have to apologise.
But if he apologised last week, then he wouldn't have to apologise this week.
I think they probably would have asked him again, don't you? Because last week he'd already apologised, and they still asked.
But then he could have appointed to his apology last week.
Yeah, but then last week he could have appointed to his apology last year.
But he didn't.
No. Funny old world. Thank you very much, sir. Shall I read you a funny text?
Go on.
James, I listened to many shows on LBC, and many hours of pointlessness that I will never get back. But hearing today's show, he sent this before you came in, but hearing today's show makes that all worth it. Please, let's have more honest, truthful shows like this. Thank you for scratching the surface of the failings of society. Nothing to do with me, mate, but thank you for the kind words. Everything to do, as ever, with the cause.